All right, being 6:30, I call the Lisle Library District Special Board Meeting to order for December 2nd, 2009. Roll call, please.
Marjorie Bortelli.
Here.
Thomas Duffy.
Here.
Thomas Hummel.
Here.
Karen Larson.
Here.
Jenny Norton.
Here.
Liz Sullivan.
Here.
Emily Swistek.
Here.
All right, next item on the agenda is opportunity for visitors to speak. You'll have 5 minutes to speak. Are there any public comments tonight? Okay, we are moving on to item 3 on the agenda, which is Lisle Library District Financial Options. It's PMA Securities LLC presentation and discussion, and I will turn it over to Andrew.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'll pass out kind of an updated version of the presentation that you all may already have.
Sorry.
It always makes me feel so important when we get the one that's, I know.
There you are.
It's a little touches.
Well, thank you all for having me here tonight. I am going to be providing an overview, so there are, some. I'll try not to go into too much detail to overwhelm you regarding the bonding process when you're looking to borrow funds in order to enhance the building, purchase a new building, or complete whatever capital project you might be looking to complete. Certainly, there is a lot of information here, even though I am just trying to keep it broad, an overview of the process. So if you have any questions, or if you'd like to interrupt me for any reason, feel free. I'm certainly probably more comfortable with more of a dialogue as opposed to just a lecture. In any case, I'm going to start off just providing a little bit of an overview of PMA, myself, PMA. So, for senior advisors in the PMA Public Finance Department, PMA is a company that provides financial services solely to units of government, primarily throughout Illinois. We are headquartered here in Naperville. And if the library were to move forward with the project, I would be the primary point person for the library. But any of my colleagues here on the screen would be able to cover in my absence if that was necessary. So as I mentioned, PMA companies, we provide financial services. The Public Finance Department, which is what I do in terms of providing advice for bond issues, resides in PMA Securities, but there's also PMA Financial Network, as well as Prudent Man Advisors, which are different forms of managing funds for units of government. As I said, our entire company focuses solely on units of government, primarily in Illinois, but also in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and some other states as well. Public finance, we have offices in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and then we have a downstate office in Fairview Heights, Illinois, which is right outside St. Louis. As a financial advisor or as a municipal advisor on the issuance of bonds, PMA has been ranked nationally in the top 10 in the years 2013 through 2017 for bank qualified or small bond issues. That would be any bond issue that is smaller than $10 million. And we were recently ranked the #1 financial advisor to all local Illinois issuers for the 12-month period ending June 30th, 2019. So, as you may have noticed, I keep referring to our role as a financial advisor, and that has a very particular meaning. In regard to bond issuance, a financial advisor is kind of the representative, if you will, of the library as you're going to issue bonds. One of the other primary roles on a bond issue is the underwriter. The underwriter on a bond issue has the responsibility of actually purchasing the bonds from the library that the library is going to be selling in order to borrow money to build your project. They will purchase the bonds from the library, and then re-offer them to the investors that they have lined up kind of on the other side of their firm. As a financial advisor, so the underwriter in their role, they're actually purchasing the bonds, so they are putting their capital at risk. They're using their own money in order to buy the bonds from the library and re-offer them or resell them to their investors that they have lined up. As financial advisor, we do not put any of our capital at risk. We are providing advice to the library, kind of guiding the library throughout the entire process from beginning to end, because it is a very pretty complex process. In that regard, there are different regulatory standards that a financial advisor is held to versus an underwriter. The financial advisor, from a regulatory standpoint, has a fiduciary duty to the library. In other words, every advice or every piece of recommendation that we give to the library regarding the entire bonding process has to be in the best financial interest of the library. On the other hand, the underwriter is not held to a fiduciary duty to the library. They are held to what's called a fair dealing standard. So they have to testify, if you will, that they've purchased the bonds at a fair price from the library, and they've reoffered them or resold them to their investors at a fair price. We don't care about fairness. What we care about is getting the best possible price, i.e. lowest interest rate on the bonds for the library. This is just some of the regulation that established the fiduciary duty. Prior to, I guess it was 2010, a lot of times the role of the financial advisor and the underwriter was confused because there was no regulatory distinction between the financial advisor and the underwriter. That's when the regulators came in and said there has to be a distinction. The financial advisor has to have a fiduciary duty to the library, and the underwriter has to be held to a fair dealing standard. So when we say that we have a fiduciary duty to the library, there are two, we'll call sub-duties that make up that fiduciary duty. One is the duty of care, and the other is the duty of loyalty. The duty of care essentially says that we know, we have the expertise, the knowledge, and the experience to know what is in the best interest of the library. And the duty of loyalty says that with that knowledge and with that expertise, we will in fact act in the best interest of the library. So, that's our role there as financial advisors. I'm going to get a little bit more into some of the municipal bond fundamentals. So, generally speaking, or broadly speaking, there are two ways that you can sell your bonds, i.e. borrow your money. One is through a direct placement, and one is through a public offering. So a direct placement is a private transaction between the library and a financial institution, most commonly a local bank that might purchase your bonds. So your bonds would not be distributed to kind of a wide world of investors. We may send out a term sheet on behalf of the library to a few local institutions, and then whichever local institution provides the best interest rate, there would be a private transaction between the library and that local financial institution. A public offering, on the other hand, is where the underwriter plays a role. So in the public offering, the underwriter purchases the bonds from the library, and then they kind of expose the bonds or share the bonds to a large, wide world of investors. Mutual funds, hedge funds, high net worth individuals, insurance companies. Insurance companies are very, very big players in the municipal bond market. So the underwriter has these relationships with all of these investors, and they will then re-offer the bonds to those investors, and whichever investor purchases them at the best price, highest price, lowest interest rate, then would win your bonds. Now there are two different ways to have a public offering. One is a negotiated sale, and one is a competitive sale. In a negotiated sale, the library pre-selects who the underwriter is going to be that purchases your bonds. And in that pre-selection process, you'll negotiate a fee because the underwriter has to make a living doing this. So they will, the library will negotiate a fee with the underwriter. Typically, that happens with the FA, and the FA is negotiating the fee on behalf of the library. And then on the day of the sale, the underwriter then opens up the bonds to their world of investors. And that's when the actual interest rates on your bonds are ultimately determined. In a competitive sale, we, as your financial advisor, will set up your bonds on a portal, on a website, and various underwriters can log into the portal. When they log into the portal, they have a timeline, or a time frame rather, in which they can submit bids on your bonds, and the underwriter that submits the best bid, again, highest price, lowest interest rate on your bonds, wins the bonds, and then from that point, they sell the bonds to their investors. So the competitive sale, they don't necessarily have their investors lined up already. They will purchase the bonds at an interest rate that they think they can sell the bonds to their investors at. But if they can't find investors to sell those bonds to, then they just hold on to the bonds themselves. Whereas in a negotiated sale, typically, I mean, there are situations where underwriters will hold on to the bonds themselves if they can't find underwriters, even though they've been a pre-selected underwriter. Or they'll just increase the interest on your bonds in order to sell them to investors. So as you might imagine, the competitive sale typically lends itself to lower interest rates for the library. And in fact, that is what we see, when we compare competitive sales to negotiated sales. So then the question might be, why would you ever consider a negotiated sale? There are certain situations in which having a negotiated sale is a preferred route, because the bonds may have a story behind them. They might be called what we call story bonds, right? There is a bad credit, there is a volatile market in which you're selling them to. If the bonds have a very long final maturity, that might merit a negotiated sale. What I believe the library would be considering would probably lend itself to a competitive sale, because based on a preliminary analysis of your financials, you would be able to sell the bonds with a very strong credit rating. My estimation would be either in the AA or AA plus, which is the highest credit rating is the AAA. One right below that is a AA plus. One below that is the AA. So I think the library would be able to get a AA or a AA plus on its credit rating. Mind you, there's only one library in the state of Illinois that has a AA plus rating from S&P, and that is Warren Newport Library up in Gurnee. So it's probably more likely that you get the AA. We did a deal recently for Fountaindale Public Library District that you might be familiar with. They're a very strong credit rating, and they came in at a AA, but they sold their bonds at very strong levels. So having a AA is certainly nothing to be ashamed of by any means. But given the fact that you would have a strong credit rating, and likely not a relatively, we'll call it standard final maturity, probably would not go out beyond 25 or 30 years. Therefore, our recommendation would probably be to go with a competitive sale. Again, just some factors that determine whether you might want to do direct placement versus a public offering. Now, there are advantages to the public offering and to the direct placement. The direct placement, what you have in a direct placement, because it is a private transaction, a lot of the disclosures that are required in a public offering are not required in a direct placement. And so your upfront costs would be a lot lower. You would not need to pay for an underwriter. You may need to pay for a placement agent, but a placement agent is typically done at a much lower cost than an underwriter. You would not need to get your bonds rated in a private or a direct placement. You would not need to have disclosure counsel on your bond issue. Disclosure counsel is the law firm that would kind of provide advice on all of the disclosures. They would ensure that all of the appropriate financial and material disclosures that are required on a bond issue are being made. For a direct placement, because it is a private transaction between you and a local institution, financial institution, a disclosure counsel would not be required. And you would not need to prepare what we call an official statement, which is the offering document that is circulated to a world of investors in a public offering. That document, which is very dense and is costly to produce, would not be required in the direct placement. So your upfront costs on a private placement or direct placement are typically lower. On the other hand, for a public offering, while you do have higher upfront costs, what we typically see is that the interest rate on the public offering is lower than the interest rate on the direct placement. And again, that's because you are circulating the bonds to a wide world of investors. So you're creating more competition for your bonds, and so the competition lends to lower interest rates. So there are certain situations in which you would want to do a public offering versus a direct placement. Typically, if it's a smaller bond issue, then you might want to do a direct placement. If you have a short final maturity, let's say 5, 6, 7 years, then you might want to do a direct placement. If you're going to have a larger bond issue, probably $5 million or larger, with a final maturity of longer than 10 years, then doing a public offering would probably be more cost effective for the library. So the next section then touches on some library financing options. I have here listed three options that the library could pursue. One is alternate revenue source bonds, 2 is debt certificates, and 3 is referendum bonds. The following slides will only provide detail regarding the alternate revenue source bonds, just because, in my opinion, that is the most likely route that the library would pursue. However, you certainly can pursue referendum bonds if you want to go to referendum and ask the taxpayers for authority to issue the bonds. The alternate revenue source bonds and the debt certificates are 2 options that are what we call non-referendum financings. So you don't have to go to referendum in order to borrow the money that you're looking to borrow. Basically, the difference between the alternate revenue source bonds and the debt certificates, they are similar in a lot of ways. What we typically see is that the alternate revenue source bonds have a lower interest rate associated with them because there is an additional security backing those bonds. So with the alternate revenue source bonds, you're going to pledge a primary revenue stream that would secure the debt service payments on your bonds. And in addition to that primary revenue stream, you will then pledge the library's full taxing authority. So in the case that primary revenue stream, for whatever reason, is not sufficient to pay debt service on your bonds, then you will have the legal authority to impose a tax onto your taxpayers in order to generate the revenue to pay the debt service on those bonds. And so if I'm an investor and looking to invest in the library by purchasing your bonds, I like that additional level of security. I like the fact that you're pledging one revenue stream and you have the legal authority to create that taxing revenue as well in order to pay the debt service on the bonds. The debt certificates, you do not have a taxing authority to generate the revenue to pay the debt service on the bonds. With the debt certificates, you simply have to kind of find the revenue in your among your operating dollars. And because of that, again, the alternate revenue source bonds will likely have a lower interest rate associated with them than the debt certificates. So,
Excuse me.
Sure.
Can you define debt service on the bond?
Sure. Yes. Good question. So the debt service on the bonds is the principal interest that the library will be paying on an annual basis to pay back the money that you borrowed, similar to your mortgage payment on a home mortgage. We call that the debt service payment in our industry.
Okay.
So as I mentioned before, for alternate revenue bonds, a payment source must be identified and pledged as the primary security for the repayment of the bonds. For the library's case, your primary revenue stream is the property tax dollars that you receive into your general fund. And so in all likelihood, it would be that property tax revenue that we would pledge, the existing property tax revenue that we would pledge as the primary source for the debt service on your bonds. But alternate bonds are double-barreled in the sense that they have that full faith pledge behind it, which gives you additional or incremental taxing authority to generate revenue. So actually, when you sell alternate revenue source bonds, you are imposing a levy onto your community, but each year that levy is abated when you show that your operating dollars generates enough revenue for the debt service on the bonds. So in order to qualify for alternate revenue source bonds, you do have to go through a few steps. The first is to show that the existing revenue stream or the primary revenue source is at least 1.25 times over and above the annual debt service payments on the bonds. And the payment period cannot exceed 40 years. Alternate revenue source bonds do not count against the library's 2.875% debt limit. That 2.875% is a percentage of the library's existing, equalized assessed valuation, the EAV. So 2.875% times your EAV is a debt limit above and beyond which you cannot borrow. The alternate revenue source bonds do not count against that debt limit, so you can borrow through alternate revenue source bonds an amount over and above the 2.875%. And actually, even other forms of borrowing can exceed this 2.875% debt limit as long as those bond proceeds are used for specific purposes. The project that you would be pursuing would qualify as one of those purposes. It's interesting because there's almost no reason for which a library would borrow money that would qualify that borrowing to count against your debt limit. So I think the libraries in Illinois must have a very good lobbyists because essentially that debt limit is rendered useless. Now, alternate revenue source bonds are subject to a backdoor petition period of 30 days. So what happens is the library board, you all, will at a board meeting authorize an ordinance of intent. Once that ordinance of intent is authorized, the library then must submit a notice in a local publication that begins the 30-day clock. Once that publication once that notice is published, the 30-day period begins. During that 30-day period, the community, the taxpayers in your community, can petition the alternate revenue source bond offering, the bond issue. And if you have 7.5% of your registered voters sign the petition, then you cannot move forward with the alternate revenue source bonds. Now, in that situation, you can then issue the debt certificates, which is the other alternative that that I mentioned earlier. But if you do that, you may receive some public backlash because the public might think that you're kind of going behind their back in order to issue the debt when they petitioned the alternate revenue source bonds. So typically, what we see is if there is a successful petition of the alternate revenue source bonds, the unit of government will then go to referendum to get the wider public to vote on the bonds. So it's subject to a 30-day backdoor petition period or backdoor referendum period. In addition, there has to be a Bond Issue Notification Act hearing, a BINA hearing. So again, the library board will authorize the BINA order, which calls for a BINA hearing to be held. And then at a subsequent meeting, the BINA hearing is held in which members of the public can come to the meeting and ask questions about the proposed bond issue. The library has no responsibility to take into account what the public might say. It just has to be held. It's just a hearing that has to be held, letting the public know that the bond issue is forthcoming. It's really the 30-day petition period that kind of gives the public a voice if they're able to get the required signatures. And if the library board anticipates there to be a petition, a successful petition, in that situation you may not even go forward with the backdoor referendum period in the BINA hearing. You just issue the debt certificates. So that's what we see units of government do. If they think that there's going to be some kind of strong public backlash, don't even go through the alternate revenue source bond kind of process, just issue the debt certificates. So from a political standpoint, the debt certificates are easier, they're more simple. On the other hand, as I mentioned before, the interest rates on the debt certificates will be a little bit higher than the alternate revenue source bonds. So the next section here is going to discuss some potential financing scenarios for the library. I just did a very kind of general analysis of the library's financial situation. You can see here since fiscal year 16, we have the general fund budgetary performance. I have the revenues in the top section and then the expenditures in that middle section there. And the line below that shows the transfers out the library has been accustomed to doing on an annual basis. Then showing the excess deficit or revenue. And looks like even after accounting for the transfers out of the general fund, the library is still generating some excess revenue on an annual basis. And you can see that the bottom line shows that the fund balance in the general fund is $4.7 million as of fiscal year 2019. So I just did some kind of simple math to indicate that if the library contributes $2.8 million from the general fund to the project, that will result in a fund balance that is 50% of the general fund expenditures. And if you wanted to aim for 100% of your general fund expenditures, you would only contribute $1,040,000 from the general fund. Obviously, at $4.7 million with your general fund expenditures at about $3.7 million, you are in excess of 100% of your general fund expenditures. So you have a little bit of capacity to use your general fund balance toward any project that you might have. Also of note is that as of June 30th, 2019, the Special Reserve Fund holds a balance of $3.3 million. So kind of right off the bat, as you're looking to pursue this capital project, you have about $3.3 million plus, let's say, 2.8, which is roughly $6 million of cash, essentially, to contribute to the project without really compromising the financial health of your general fund. Most, at least from a rating agency perspective, if you have 50% of your general fund expenditures in your fund balance, you are very healthy. So, at well over 100%, you're even healthier. Now, I would kind of provide a caveat to that and say, the more you have in your fund balance from a rating agency perspective, the better off you are, right? And if there is something that's going to be able to kind of move you from that AA rating to the AA plus rating, the general fund balance in excess of 100% might be one of those factors. The various factors that go into your credit rating, some are well within the control of the library, and some are not within the control of the library. In fact, the largest category, the largest rating category, is the economy of the local area, and that is something that you as administrators or as board members, you have no control over what median home levels are or median income levels are, things like that. The economy as a whole kind of has an impact on those demographics or those statistics. However, you do have control over how much debt you incur. You do have control over the budgetary performance, whether or not you're generating more revenue than you are spending money. And so because of that, you want to be able to do the things that you can't control. You want to be able to do that well. Having a very solid general fund balance is one of those items. Furthermore, if you are looking to contribute a significant amount of cash on hand to the project, then you want to be sure that your general fund revenues are strong moving forward to reestablish that kind of cash fund. So here is where we created a few different scenarios of what it might look like to borrow various amounts of money. On the left-hand side of the page, the three columns, what we were looking to do, kind of our goal, was to see how much your annual payments would be to borrow the amounts at the top. So $3 million, $5 million, $8 million. And you'll see that for the $3 million scenario, your payments would be roughly, we'll say $205,000 a year for the next 20 years. To borrow $5 million, your annual payments would be roughly $340,000 a year for the next 20 years. And to borrow $8 million, your annual payments would be approximately $540,000? Yeah, $540,000 a year for the next 20 years. Conversely, the three scenarios on the right say, well, what if our annual payments are $300,000 a year for the next 20 years? Well, how much can we borrow? So at roughly $300,000 per year for 20 years, you can borrow approximately $4.385 million. I believe that's the number there at the top. And then how much could you borrow if your payments were roughly $400,000 a year for the next 20 years, which gets you to, I'm sorry, I can't see these numbers.
5.87.
5.87 million. And then at roughly $500,000 a year for the next 20 years, that would get you $7.335 million in proceeds for you to spend on the actual project itself. I show here down at the bottom the estimated TIC. That's kind of like the, so each of these terms would have its own distinct interest rate associated with it. Each of these terms is considered its own bond. I've heard it described as kind of a ladder, and each rung on the ladder is its own bond, so they have its own interest rate. But if you aggregate all of the interest rates together, that's where the TIC comes in. And the TIC kind of reflects the aggregate interest rate for the borrowing.
So are you saying that each fiscal year has its own equivalent of an annual TIC, and then the estimated TIC is the cumulative?
Correct.
For that 20-year period?
Correct. So for example, this 2020 year, or let's start with the 2021 year because that 2020 year is not a full year. That 2021 year will have an interest rate associated to it, and it will be lower than the interest rate associated to the 2040 term, because you can borrow for shorter terms at cheaper rates than you can borrow for longer terms. But the aggregate kind of in total interest rate would be the 309.
And those interest rates are set. They don't float at all.
They are set on the day that you sell the bonds, correct.
Okay.
Now, a bond issue like this that has 20 years, there will typically be an optional redemption feature associated with them, so that the library in, let's say, 7 or 8 years from now, if interest rates are lower in year 7 or 8, then you can refinance these bonds much the same way you would refinance your home mortgage. Although with a home mortgage, if you borrow your home mortgage today and tomorrow interest rates are all of a sudden 1% lower, you can refinance your mortgage tomorrow. With municipal bonds, you cannot do that. You have to wait for that 7 or 8 year. Now the library can determine whether you want a 7 or 8 year call feature on it, or a 9 year or a 10 year, or even a 6 year or a 5 year. What we typically see is that call features are between 7 and 9 years. And it's important to note that the call feature is an option for the library, right? It's an option for you to refinance your bonds at a date prior to the maturity of the bonds. And so you have to pay for that option. Not only do you pay for that option, but the earlier you make that call feature, meaning the sooner you allow yourself the flexibility to refinance the bonds, the more costly that call feature will be. Now, we will provide an analysis for you as to the estimated cost of those call features. It's, you know, it's a little bit of a guessing game because the value of that call feature really can't ultimately be determined until that future date, right? Because you don't know, I mean, if interest rates are higher at that future date, then you'll never take advantage of that call date unless you want to increase your annual payments, which no one ever does. And so you'll never take advantage of the call date, and so you paid for something that essentially had no value to the library, right? But if interest rates are lower, 7 or 8 years from now, then you will have the liberty to refinance the bonds at a lower interest rate and lower your annual payments.
What about prepayment options?
So that is essentially the prepayment option. You can't prepay until that call date.
Okay, you talked about refinancing.
Oh, okay. So so if you have if you want to use cash on hand, you mean, to prepay? Again, so if you can't essentially prepay until you get to that call date. But once you get to the call date, instead of refinancing, like I was talking about, you can use your cash on hand at that future point in time. But until that call date, or up to that call date, investors are locked into their return. That return cannot be touched.
They're guaranteed their return.
They're guaranteed their return. And so you really wouldn't prepay until you get to that call date. At which point you do have the option to either refinance with a new bond issue, or you can use the cash on hand, as you're suggesting, to prepay the remaining portions. So obviously, if your call date's, let's say in 2030, then only maturities 2031 through 24 can be either prepaid or refinanced, right? Everything up through 2030 is already gone, is already paid, and so you would not be able to alter those payments. And those are the guarantees that the investor has locked themselves into.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing to note about the TIC is that it also takes into account the sum of the fees that you will be paying upfront. So that 3.09 is not only reflective of the interest rates that are associated with each rung, if you will, but it also encompasses some of the costs, not all of the costs, but some of the costs. If you would like, a rate, in order to encompass all the costs, that 3.09 would then be closer to 3.15 or something like that. It might be a little bit higher. And also these rates, we use rates as of November 15th, 2019. So they're a couple weeks dated, but we did add 25 basis points, or 0.25%, to what we think the interest rates would be in today's environment. We just added 25 basis points, assuming the credit rating for the library at a AA. This is the outcome. Obviously, if and when you issue the bonds, interest rates may be wildly different than where they were on November 14th or 15th. And so it may be different.
Are issuing bonds, is that cyclical at all? Is there a better time of year to issue them?
That's a good question. I would say that, towards the end of the year is probably not as good. There tends to be more supply to the market towards the end of the year. And the reason for that is because the maturity dates, right? These payments are due on a specific date in each of those years. And they are, for most cases, they are December 1. And so if a unit of government is looking to refinance a callable bond issue that has a call date on it, then you can only do so 90 days prior to the call date, which is 12/1. Let's say in this year it's 12/1/19. You can only do it 90 days prior to 12/1/19. So as early as September of 2019, right? You can't do it in August, you can't do it in July, you can't do it in, so forth and so on. And because of that, we see a lot of refinancings occurring towards the latter portion of the year. So what we've seen recently is that there's been a big supply to the market over the last couple of months. So yeah, I would probably say just want to avoid the latter part of the year. Summertime, investors tend to go on vacation too. You don't want to sell bonds the week of 4th of July. You definitely don't want to sell bonds during Thanksgiving. Last week it was a very low week during Thanksgiving. So there are definitely certain times, and when the Federal Reserve is meeting, you typically want to avoid those meeting dates because the market reacts pretty significantly, even when everyone anticipates the Federal Reserve, as we have been for the last couple of meetings, that they're going to lower interest rates. That's always that's been anticipated. Everyone knows that that's happening, but when the Federal Reserve comes out with their meeting minutes and Jerome Powell, the Fed chairman, makes comments, the market reacts to his comments, even though they already knew what the decision was going to be. So you want to avoid Federal Reserve meeting dates, things like that. That's a good question.
So spring and fall.
Spring and fall, yeah, or early summer. So, as I mentioned before, my thought is that the library would receive a AA or a AA plus from S&P regarding the indicative rating. S&P is not the only rating agency out there. The other main rating agency is Moody's. Fitch and Kroll are also in the market, although for the kind of bond issue that you all will be issuing, you probably really only need one rating. And if you're going to choose one, you're going to go with Moody's or S&P. They're the two biggest. And we typically see S&P providing better ratings than Moody's. Most of the time, I'd say they're probably pretty similar. They come to the same conclusion. But if one rating agency ever provides a slightly better rating, it's going to be S&P and not Moody's. So we typically go with S&P. Recommend that our clients go with S&P. Obviously, so here, anything that is below the BBB minus line is considered junk. Anything considered above the BBB minus line is considered investment grade. And at a AA or a AA plus, you are well into the investment grade category. So again, I would imagine that the library would be able to access the market from a position of strength with very strong credit profile. And then just a quick market update here. So when municipal bonds are priced, they're priced off of a municipal bond index. That index is called the AAA MMD. AAA meaning highest credit quality, MMD standing for municipal market data. And the AAA MMD, just as your bonds would have a specific interest rate for each term, for each rung, the AAA MMD also has an interest rate for each term. What I'm showing here is the 1 year, the 5 year, the 10-year, and the 20-year terms of the AAA MMD, which goes out to 30 years. And so the blue is the 1, the red is the 5, the green is the 10, and the purple is the 20. And the gray backdrop that we have there is what the Federal Reserve is doing with the Fed funds rate. And one of the things to note here is that you see that the blue line, which is the 1 year MMD, closely follows what the Fed is doing with the Fed funds target rate. But the 5, the 10, and the 20, there's a lot more volatility with those rates because there are a number of other global factors that impact what is happening on the long end of the yield curve, of the municipal bond yield curve. So, obviously there are impeachment proceedings going on right now with the president. If that is successful and the president is removed from office, that would have a significant impact to the municipal bond market. If President Trump is able to establish some positive momentum or movement with the tariff war with China, that would impact municipal bond markets. If we go to war, that would also impact municipal bond markets, or any number of major kind of geopolitical events really do have an impact on the market here. In fact, you can see that spike there in about well, there's a spike right after, right in 2009. That's the financial crisis, right? The housing crisis that happened. And then there's the one in 2011. There's a spike there, and that's when Meredith Whitney, who had accurately foretold of the housing crisis, then went on to say that the next kind of recession-causing crisis in our U.S. economy would be a widespread default of municipal bonds. So she made that statement in 2011, and municipal bond rates responded to that and shot up. And you have a number of other events that have happened. 2013, 2014. That's the taper tantrum when the Federal Reserve was kind of calling off quantitative easing. 2016, 2017, there's another spike there. That's when President Trump won the election, as it was kind of not really expected, and so the bond market responded to that. But really, the main thing here is that where interest rates are right now, they are really, really low relative to recent historical markets. So it's as good a time as any to be borrowing in the municipal bond market. Flip side of that is you're probably not earning a whole lot of return on your investments. But you can hedge that by borrowing at very low interest rates. And that is all I have for you. Some references at the back.
Any other board questions or comments?
Have you helped anybody in Lisle or the neighboring cities, municipalities, not just libraries?
Let's see. We recently did a bond issue for Crest Hill, the city of Crest Hill. We did 2 bond issues for them. We work extensively with a number of school districts. To be completely honest, PMA as a brand really established itself among school districts, both on the investment side and in the public finance side, which is what I do with the bond issues. Trying to think. We work with, there's like LaGrange Park District we work with Village of Mount Prospect. Village of Lakewood is, obviously a lot further away. But up there we have Village of Lakewood, City of Crystal Lake.
I was just wondering, I know that the Lisle Park District does something with bonds, I don't know what, and I was just
Sure.
wondering if you worked with them, but,
We do not work with Lisle Park District.
okay,
Yeah.
no problem, I just
Sure.
was curious.
Any other questions?
What is the typical timeline from when you're engaged to when the bond's actually issued?
Well, when we're engaged, that's kind of a tricky question.
A range?
So
3 months, 6 months, 12 months? Start to finish?
if you needed, we could, if you were to engage us today, we could sell the bonds as quickly as probably 2 months. That would probably be on what's going to hold up the process. It depends on what kind of financing you pursue, right? If it's an alternate revenue source bond versus a debt certificate. A debt certificate would be much quicker to execute. So what's going to hold up the process are kind of the legal steps that the library would have to go through. In terms of our engagement, the library can really engage us at any point in the process, and we can, kind of help finish it wherever you are, from whatever point you're at to wherever, to the point of sale. But the main thing would be the library board adopting the ordinance of intent, which then allows you to publish the notice of intent in the publication, which begins that 30-day period for the backdoor referendum. That's kind of the big step that needs to get done and out of the way before the library can move forward. After that, there's the rating agency, the rating agency presentation. So we'll put together a pretty thorough presentation in coordination with the library's administration, and communicate the credit story of the library to S&P. And then they take another week and a half to decide after we have that presentation. And then we have to prepare the offering document, right, which is that kind of really dense document that is shared with the investing world. So there are a number of steps. There's also the binding hearing, but that's typically done in coordination with the 30-day backdoor referendum period. So I would say that, you know, if you're before that 30-day backdoor referendum period, probably the fastest you could get it done is 2 months.
Any other questions, staff? All right.
All right,
Appreciate
thank you.
it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. The next item on the agenda, which actually wasn't on the agenda, is an executive session. We were originally going to go into executive session to talk about an initial offer we received from a developer, as well as the appraisal of our current properties, but when you probably saw me in the beginning of the meeting, when I was on my phone, I was talking to the attorney. We cannot go into executive session in regards to the appraisal for our properties, since we've not made a decision if we're gonna sell our current properties, so that one we'll have to either discuss later on. But in the meantime, we are gonna go into executive session, it should be pretty quick, to discuss an initial offer from a developer. So if I could get a motion to go into executive session in regards to 5 ILCS 120/2A, purchase or lease of real property for the use of the Lisle Library District, including whether a particular parcel should be acquired and the setting of a price for sale or lease of property owned by the Lisle Library District. Somebody just want to make a move that motion? Yeah, go for it, knock your socks off. Go for
Your
it.
voice is great, Mark.
Make a motion to go into executive session to discuss 5 ILCS 120/2A, purchase or lease of real property for the use of the LLD, including whether a particular parcel should be acquired and the setting of a price for sale or lease of property owned by the Lisle Library District.
We have a motion second.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Roll call, please.
How about discussion?
Oh, sorry, it's discussion.
Can I don't know the answer to this, but can we go into executive session if it wasn't listed on the agenda?
Yes, because we're not taking any action.
Great,
Yeah,
okay.
just discuss.
I just don't want to
No,
violate
we're
any of
fine. That's
those.
actually what we call the attorney for, so we're okay with that
Okay.
part. But thanks for reminding me of the discussion. I
Okay.
haven't done that in a while. Roll call, Chris?
Karen Larson,
Here.
Jenny Norton,
Aye.
Liz Sullivan,
Aye.
Emily Swistek,
Aye.
Marjorie Bartelli,
Aye.
Thomas Duffy,
Aye.
Thomas Hummel.
Aye. All right, all in favor? We will be going into executive session. It shouldn't be too long. All the visitors, except for CCS, wants to go outside. It shouldn't be that long, and then we'll go into the rest of the agenda. Thank you. Yeah, yep. 7:24.
Always better. Right.
So it being 8:24, can I get a motion to go back into open session? Motion to go back in open
I
session?
moved to
Okay.
return to open session.
I'll second.
Second.
Yeah,
Karen?
you got it.
All right. Roll call?
Liz Sullivan,
Here.
Emily Swistek,
Aye.
Marjorie Bartelli,
Aye.
Thomas Duffy,
Aye.
Karen Larson,
Aye.
Jenny Norton,
Aye.
Thomas Hummel.
Aye. All right, we are back at 8:24 in open session. Sorry about that, folks. It took a little longer than I expected, but we had a lot of questions. So next item on the agenda is Lisle Library District Facility Options, CCS presentation and discussion to Mark Rogers.
All right, so once again, thanks for having us here. And for the public, CCS is, we're helping with the discussion of project definition for a potential building project, at least trying to align different options that are available to the library, be it funding options and scope options and schedule options. So the intent today was to go through, and what we came from out of the last meeting was you gotta figure out what you want to spend first. Because obviously it's great to have all these big ideas, but you need to know that A, we want to foot the bill for that. or vice versa, figure out what you want to fit the bill for, and then see how much you can get into that. So just a quick recap, since it's been a little bit of time since Andrew was here. But in essence, current library holdings, what we cleaned out of this was the general fund balance that you have. This is your operating fund. Was 4.48 million in reserves. Now, this is a number that Andrew said we can take it down to something less, and that they expected at least 50% you want to be in your reserves for state agencies and different agencies, financial agencies, to look at it as a positive, which that would enable about 2.8 million of this to be freed up. Special capital reserves, as of June, you had $3.3 million in there roughly. The other part of this is borrowing options, and this is more for discussion with the library, so feel free to jump in here. We walk through those in essence. The high-level overview of that was $5 million can be borrowed for about $350K annual debt service, and that's me paraphrasing, so it might be up or down a little bit from there. But and what that would mean would be there's no additional tax on the public as long as the library is able to pay back the debt within its yearly operating budget. So you're not adding taxes to the taxpayers, but you'd have to pay back that debt service within your operating funds.
So right now, the library saves $300,000 a year for special reserves.
For special reserves alone.
So
right?
you're saying for $350, we could bond for $5 million?
Correct.
Okay.
Around there. So really, when you're looking at that, you have two pools there. The other referendum, which we didn't go down the path of, because we've not gotten a sense from our last meeting that there was an appetite for referendum, but if there is, we can just talk about it. But that obviously is out there. Partnerships, which we could talk about a little bit if you're going to go into a downtown site, how that partnership might work or what the deal might be there. And then you also have speculative miscellaneous sources, such as donations or fundraising, grants, and land. And I know that you guys are looking at a property appraisal right now, and that's ongoing in the process right now. We did list donations and grants. However, with any large project, especially if you're budgeting for the project and designing it, we typically do not advise that you include that number in your budget for the project up front, because it's susceptible to you being able to get that money in without having a track record of doing so. And usually that's a really small amount that you just don't want to put that in there. So I'm going to stay here for a moment before moving on, because I think this is the very first question that's really important, is what are you looking to spend? So we can kind of go through the space and everything else, but I think just maybe have some thoughts in your mind. So that the last slide of this, I think you guys saw the slides in advance, it's kind of next steps. I'd like to discuss a little bit of what you think, what level of spending you think might be appropriate. Don't need to decide today. You don't need to have any of that discussion right now. But we want to at least, if you're looking at doing a project, start thinking about what do we want to spend, because that'll impact what you can get. Any discussion there right now? Or
I would go through, since we just got this.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't.
All right, so this is the part that you've just gotten, going through here. The next part of it is just trying to figure out how to fit these spaces into a potential development downtown. So what we heard last meeting, and I wanted to kind of summarize some of the major things that you came back to us with, is looking at additional restrooms. You'd like to have public restrooms on all floors, 2 family restrooms, and at least 1 nursing room. So when you kind of combine that, you're looking at potentially about 400 square feet plus or minus. These are all ranges, right? This is order of magnitude. We're trying to put something concrete to this that is still speculative at this point in time. The next bit is an additional youth area service space. Sorry, this is your youth space. You'll see a summary chart in the next page. Is significantly lower than your adult services and adult departments. So this is saying, okay, we want to free up a little bit more space for youth areas. We're also looking at potentially doing another youth story time craft makerspace room, maybe a mixed use type room. And we said it would be similar in size to your story room that's up there right now. So your story room up there right now did some takeoffs. It's about 450 square feet. So it's saying, okay, we'd just like on a room that size for youth. And then we'd like to add a dedicated preteen or teen space, whatever that might be, as you guys are looking through this. So okay, maybe that's 1,000 square feet. Again, that's about double what your story room is upstairs right now. I'm trying to put it in a little context there. And then the 1 additional meeting room space. So this combined room, if you take down that wall, is roughly 1,600 square feet, 1,500 to 1,600 square feet. So we're saying half of this, we're adding a little bit more for 1 additional meeting room. So maybe you have 1 large one that's subdivided and 1 small one or something like that, if you so choose. And an additional study room space. Right now, you have roughly 760 square feet in study rooms. That's between the two spaces that are kind of tucked into the left when you come down the stairs, and also the one space that's more by the adult computers. It's kind of tucked in back there and closed behind the glass. So if we wanted to increase that by 50%, let's just say we look at another 250 square feet. Really, you could just subdivide the 760 square foot large rooms a little bit further, make them small if you don't want to add that, but we wanted to at least capture it a little bit in this. Okay to move on? Any discussions here? All right. So doing that, we then summarize taking those programming embeds, and I'll walk through each of the columns here, into a table to see where we're at. So your existing space, we kind of calculated doing some takeoff in your floor plans, it's roughly 33,000 square feet. And we're Manitude, we're working with what existing drawings we have. The existing library site, if you were to do something here, and say we didn't want to do any additions, you just want to try to live within the existing walls, you're going to renovate 33,000 square feet, obviously. How would that breakdown work? So what we did is we said, okay, if we're not going to increase space, then let's not look at the dedicated teen space, increased youth service area, and then no additional story time space. Basically what we're saying is, okay, you can get a little bit more, you get your restrooms, you get a new entrance, you get a new facade around, updated facade around, but you're not gaining a ton of space. And we're rearranging some of the adult department went down a little bit to accommodate the new restrooms, to get that in there. Some minor tweaks. Essentially, you get brand new building, brand new layout. So literally, we come in here and you'd say, okay, we're using the existing floor plates, but take down the walls, move all the rooms around so they work more efficiently. So you don't have these triangular rooms in the back service areas. So you don't have mechanical rooms that end up with these weird corners that you can't really use. So 33,000 is a little bit more feasible that way, but you still don't gain a ton of space. The next option I want to show cost here in a minute, so keep these in mind, is if we were to put the addition on, so just purely adding the additional square footage that you asked for last time, that's 37,000 square feet and change. So the youth department, you can see that's the biggest increase. That's where most of the space is allocated towards. Your restrooms went up a little bit further too, because you're putting a little bit more restrooms on all the floors, so you have to do a little bit more for that. But in any case, in any of these, you're still getting a family restroom, you're still getting new restrooms on all the floors. Next one down is a new downtown site. So this is saying any site downtown that has a 30,000 square foot footprint for you to walk into, and we're trying to allocate some of the spaces with that. Now keep in mind that would be much different from here. Potentially it could be 1 story, it could be 2 stories. It's not necessarily going to be 3 split level stories. There's a lot of efficiencies on there, so you might not have 3 stair landings, elevator space, and all that other stuff. So that's why we're starting to see some of these numbers kind of move around a little bit. Adult department went down a little bit, generally stayed within spitting distance there. General circulation, you can see that went way down. That's, again, the stair landings. That's your areas where you're walking the building. You have to go down a stair up to a landing, up or on an elevator. It went down significantly. Mechanical spaces, we roughly stayed about the same, just to keep percentage. Meeting room spaces, we went up, and that allows you to get that little additional meeting room space. That was roughly 500 square feet, I want to say. Then you have the restrooms, so you get obviously everything you need there, but say you're on 1 story, you don't need to have 3 separate restrooms on 3 different levels. So that's why the number is actually a little bit less. Staff areas, it came down a little bit because you have a little bit more efficiency, so you don't have these weird back of house corridors going around necessarily. And then your youth department, that's about where you're at today, but again, it would be a bit more efficiently. That would not include a dedicated teen space. Again, so both these 2 options, you can see the little asterisks there and there, don't include these 3 spaces. The next jump up is to basically say, okay, we're getting all whatever you want. It's actually less square footage because you don't have multiple stories compared to 37 versus 36. But you're getting the additional teen space, you're getting the additional youth services and things of that nature. Any questions there? Fire away.
At the risk of nitpicking, what was the logic for, if you're comparing second column and the fourth column in, just the restrooms line? You didn't really get much improvement, even though you're starting with a clean slate, and I'm just curious why there was barely any, efficiency out of that.
For restrooms specifically, we figured we need a larger restroom on, say it's a 1 floor downtown building. Instead of having 2 stalls here, 1 stall there, you still need to have a certain number of stall counts to meet code. So we assumed it's going to be roughly 750 square feet for that one his and hers restroom. And then on top of that, you're still going to have your family restroom, 2 of those at least, and then 1 nursing room. So that's really why those numbers don't jump around too much, and they're small spaces. And you figure a single stall restroom, if you're saying a staff restroom or something like that, or a family restroom, usually about 70, 75 square feet. So even if you add 2 or 3 more in, it's not adding a whole bunch of square footage. And the reason why we broke down in these 4 categories, we wanted to give you a couple different cost options, at least as a preliminary basis. Obviously, you can scale these down, you can scale them up, you can not do any, we can completely change how you're looking at your renovation. But we wanted to at least give you some apples to apples. So really, I'd look at, estimated renovation in current space against the estimated 30K downtown is roughly apples to apples in terms of what you're getting in that building. And then estimated renovation in addition versus estimated preferred downtown. That's again, trying to compare those 2. All right? Anything else? All right. So here's the big picture. So again, I think the color is consistent. So we have renovations. This is 33,000 square foot. If we're looking at project costs, not just construction costs, but we actually do have a bunch of pro formas with about 20 pages of detail for each one of these options that we can give and review in a final bind or a final report that we'll give you. But essentially, it's 9.7 million, in the range of 9.7 million for that renovation of this current space. That's without additions, but that is with a new entrance down below, and it's with and some new facade type elements worked in there, and re-siding it essentially. One of the comments was they didn't like the brick and the siding as it was, so we can take a look at those. The next one down the line is renovation in addition to meet program. So to do this, and I'll show this, somebody should flip a page ahead and I'll come back. If you look at your site, and this is the drawings we're looking at, sorry, it's attached to the scan, but basically this is your building. Where we're at today is right here. This is your entrance in, and this is your employee parking area. So we're saying, okay, if we put a new entrance down here, and we had to somehow add 5,000 square feet to this building, 4,000 to 5,000 square feet to accommodate your new program, where do we add that? So we have 2 locations we thought of. One would be expanding out and bumping your first floor ladder. You don't want to dig into the ground and everything else. If you do that, you lose parking. You need to add some parking. So it kind of steamrolled and said, okay, well, you have a retention pond there. One of the things you can look at doing, it's costly, is building over retention, but putting a permeable paving system in there and actually doing stormwater detention underneath your parking. We looked at it from some different projects. You see there's a lot of commercial applications. You can look down in 75th. There's I think it's a DSW and TJ Maxx, wherever else, that is that same condition. When you drive over, they seal the pavers, stormwater detention is below that. It comes at a premium though. And why I'm saying that is you can see the big jump. We only had basically 4,000 and change square feet, but we jumped a significant dollar amount. So as soon as you start adding on space and taking new parking and moving parking lots, you're starting to add up the cost. This is compared to a 30,000 square foot downtown Lisle build out. So again, we're comparing kind of renovation versus new build out. And this new build out pro forma, what we're anticipating being, I'll call it, offered to the library would be potentially the shell and core. No parking cost to the library in terms of building a structure. So really it's just the stuff you put inside the box, including all your mechanicals, all your plumbing, all your electric, and all the finishes. The only thing I did include in there, because I don't know what it is putting a new concrete slab down. Because developers typically are going to want to put a concrete slab down, just to have you cut it up to put your plumbing below for all your restrooms and everything else. So that is included. That's about 9.3 million. So we're starting to see some of the efficiencies with going somewhere, but being, again, gifted essentially the exterior enclosure. That's the big carrot that we're anticipating being offered. The next one would be the downtown Lisle build out to be the current program. And basically this just equates to a little bit larger program, which comes out to about 10.6. There's not as much of an increase again because we're not having to pay for parking, exterior enclosure, all that. You're basically just paying for your interior build out.
Do developers, are they aware that when you put books, there's extra load on the concrete? Because
Yes.
so they're aware of those?
We would make them aware. And the one advantage of, say it's on the first floor. That first floor is a beefed up slab, basically, but you're not carrying that load all the way down into multiple levels of structure.
Right.
So you wouldn't be concerned about that. It all depends. If they're gonna put it, developer's gonna come in and say, I want this on the second floor. Well, two things it doesn't work for. One, structure gets more costly, as you're alluding to. And number two is how do you get people up to the second floor and maintain that public access? With elevators, it gets more expensive. Stairs gets more expensive. You have to have multiple means of egress. So really, these two options, what they're presuming is it's all on one level on the first floor. And we can take a look at these and break them up into multiple different ways. We can say it's 2 stories, 3 stories, whatever it might be, but that was a good spot to start to say, okay, it's 1 floor. Here we go. Any questions here right now? Feel free. No, this is why we're here. We're here to answer your questions.
Looking around for weapons in the room. Nope. Just wondering why what are the big ticket items making up the substantial cost of the renovation in the current space? It doesn't, to me, it seems a little bit counterintuitive that it would be so comparable to a starting over space of a comparable size.
The big difference there is, I'm actually flipping through here.
Don't forget, on the one downtown, there's no foundations. So you're not just looking at a new building, you're looking at a building that's being given to you. So, I mean, traditionally, if you were to look at a new building downtown and the 30,000 square feet, that would be a lot more than what you're looking at there. Because you don't have the foundations, you don't have the skin.
Yeah, so it's not quite apples to apples.
Exactly.
But,
Yeah.
but it's not apples to mountains either.
So, yeah, I'll go down actually and compare them side by side here. So if I'm looking at the enclosure right off the bat, if we're assuming we're in a new siding and a new entrance, basically we're talking about over $500,000 for exterior enclosure here. That cost would be negligible at a downtown environment, so there's $500,000 right there. The next bit as we go down, interior construction, obviously there's a square footage difference there between the 3,000 square feet. And on a square foot cost for renovation, and you're in the range of $250 to $300 a square foot, depending on what you do. So that times 3,000 gets you some of the difference right there. And then your next significant ones going down are your mechanicals, just based on the difference. And really you're looking at site work, because site work, we're also, if you're doing an entrance here, that means you are doing some paving, that means you are doing some concrete work for a sidewalk. You're having to restripe areas, so we've allocated for that. So if I'm looking at the two, yeah, you might have about the same in interiors, but what you saved on the exterior, and you can kind of put it in to saying maybe $1.5 million or so on exterior versus what we're spending here. You make up in terms of your site work and your exterior enclosure. Did it answer it? It's more.
I'm hard to please.
No, that's fine. That's why we're
I
here.
think it would be helpful, because I'm stuck where she is as well.
Mhm.
It would be helpful if we could dig into your performers.
We can do that.
Yeah, if you don't
Provide that,
mind.
yes.
A couple of us are nerds.
Yep, no, I'd love to, we can provide the performance, and then basically you guys can come back and take a look at it. Say we were to come back in next month or next board meeting, whatever else, if there are questions, we can address those then.
Yeah, you don't have to make them like pretty, you know, I mean, and they can just be,
I did print them a lot, they can actually pass those out. So
Oh.
I have them all for you tonight. You can take them home.
that would be great.
And do some homework. I'm gonna pass them out now, or?
Whenever.
Yeah.
Uh,
All right. So let's just do this. Actually, no, I'll take it, one, pass it down now. Sure. And you can see in the top, they're all labeled interior versus base versus, it's the same tiles that are on there. So next one. While we're here, I will actually start going through those. I'll give you an overview so you can quickly read through it, and that's it.
Okay.
Figure it out for yourselves.
I was expecting a lot of macros in Excel. This is,
I'm gonna try to, there are.
I bet. Well,
Four, because
Oh,
on the
okay, I'm
chart,
sorry.
there's 4
Oh, gotcha.
numbers, and
Gotcha,
these are
gotcha.
the backup of the 4
2 renovations and 2 new
one more?
buildings.
Right here. I'm trying to keep you organized.
Here.
thank you.
Sorry.
He doesn't, he
What,
needs
did I
that
skip
one?
it?
Did I get you this one?
I see.
4 out of 4, you're okay.
No, this is different.
There you go.
That's right.
That detail.
Here's the fourth.
So the way to organize it, just looking at these, if you look at the top headings, the third line down, this is downtown, two of them, say downtown Lisle, those are the two options that are orange in the screen, orange, yellow, and purple. And then there's the third line down there too, so it's existing building renovation,
Gotcha.
renovation addition. And each one has the square
Thank
footage.
you.
So these are the performance. These are the high-level summaries. Behind this, there's the additional detailed breakdowns, and we also have a full construction cost estimate that we've been working through at an order of magnitude level of detail. So we're not saying this is all, not counting individual plumbing elbows and things like that, but we put it all in.
Its order of magnitude is what it represents.
So I'm just going to use this renovation current space as a template to kind of walk through, and they all are the same format, all are all the same, just the numbers change where they need to. So the first page is a summary. It's high level land cost. Obviously, there's no land cost. You already here. So going down to bond cost, usually it's about 1.5% of what you're bonding. And we don't know what the appetite for the library to bond anything is at this point, if any bond. So just for now, I threw in 10 million saying, okay, you're gonna bond the whole thing, which we know is probably not realistic, but it's there as a safeguard so that we can, it's always better to bring these down a little bit than to have to build them back up. Building costs, it's again where I do the construction cost estimate. The second page of this document is a detailed breakdown of building costs. Professional service costs, again, the same thing. The third page in this is a detailed breakdown of professional service costs. And then FF&E costs, the fourth page, is a breakdown of those pieces. And on top of all that, we do call out an owner's project cost contingency. And what that is your own contingency held in your pocket to safeguard against unforeseen conditions. That would not be a contractor's contingency or anything like that.
Is that contingency budgeted based on total cost, or like, how did you come up with that figure?
So that one is 3% of total cost, and what it is total cost of the different components. So if you look at the next pages, you can see that, for instance, on the third page, there's owner's professional service cost contingency for $31,000 and change. This is on the professional service cost table. That is included within the $281,000 on the cover. Same thing for the $29,250. That's included in the cover above. That's why you're seeing.
The library will close in 15 minutes. If you wish to apply for or to renew a library card, please do so now.
And you can prove that it's included because, for instance, this 1039 you're seeing in the professional services cost, that's above the 31,000. We're just trying to say, okay, how much are we allocating towards this or towards that? Once we get into the detail and you have an actual project you want to look at, even if the project is a $100,000 project versus a $10 million project, you're still going to look at those and allocate them for future unknowns. So flipping on the second page, each one's very similar. Under building costs, we kind of outline some permitting expenses, construction costs, and this is where the estimate comes into play. A change order contingency, and that's something you would hold for changes that are during construction, but that would be applied against the contractor. Phasing, if you're going to renovate this space, you're going to have to, if you're going to stay in here and stay occupied, unless you move out and rent somewhere, you're going to have to put temporary walls up, do a bunch of different logistical issues. So we allocated a cost to doing that. Utility hookups. Now this one is, if we're putting in a new addition, we need to change the utilities, we want to have that as a safeguard, but again, as we get into more detail, and this is high level order magnitude, some of those can be pulled around and moved around. And then you can see the construction cost estimate breakdown. Jenny, this is where you can compare each of these charts against each other to kind of see where the differences are on each of the options. Going to the third page, professional service costs. Any questions on the first two pages?
I just want to confirm that these are all examples.
These are
and
all
we can
examples.
adjust anything.
Yep, I did put that in the top of the page. These are all
Yes.
for each page, each one. This is we don't have a project yet. Really, until the library decides that you want to spend money on something, there's nothing. So we can curtail this to whatever funding level that you potentially see fit or need for. And going down, okay, so on the third page, I left off the professional service costs. These are all percentage basis based on previous experience on our projects. And where things might be allocated. So it includes primary consultants, maybe specialized consultants that may or may not be included in an architectural contract or something like that. Owner-provided services, if you're having to dig down for a new entrance or something like that, you might have to get soil tested or environmental type reviews. So we want to take a look at that, and at least have a plug in there to cover that if it needs to happen. Last page is the FF&E costs. So we made some assumptions here talking to Tatiana. We said, you know, you're being cost conscious and you're staying in your building, potentially in this option. So furniture, essentially, we're looking at doing 50% new, 50% reused. So we're not.
We just went down the middle.
Went down the middle, yep. You still would have to have moving and storage, because if you're vacating half of a building or 2/3 of a building at a time, you have to put it somewhere. So that's what those costs are, and that's really doing 2 moves essentially. Fixtures, you're going to have potentially some new signage. We talked about trying to get a little bit more access onto Front Street. Well, you might want to do another sign there, so that has a cost. Especially interiors, some, you know, if you have some special wall finishes or things of that nature, artwork, miscellaneous items that are on there. Equipment, we did pull out any RFID. Talking to staff, thought was it could be done.
It's already in
outside
our
of this.
budget.
Yep. So that's not there. And then any of the AV pieces are not in this one, because we have a 50K allowance for this building. In the new building, we're looking at adding monies, because you'd still have to unplug everything, move it over there, change it around. You're still gonna have to touch it, feel it, and put something to
You
it.
call them what kind of service? AVP?
AV, audio visual.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, oh,
So this would be
okay.
any of the, I'll call it servers, network switches, printers, computers, and we do have that IT general allowance in there to safeguard against anything that you would have to do in this site.
Now, I think what's important is you did not come up with this. This was based, I mean, you came up with the cost, but it's based on information that you queried us about. I mean,
Yes.
this just isn't out of left field.
No.
This came out of our community engagement survey information. This came out of our previous architectural survey. This came out of feedback that you asked us for.
Correct.
So I just want to stress that, you know, although these are estimates, they are grounded in materials we've either given you or questions that we've answered that you've asked us for prioritization of, et cetera.
Correct, it's 100%
Okay.
correct. And so the big version of that is, the program, which we kind of went through already, and saying, okay, we're gonna start with 33,000. And what we did is we took your existing square footage, we really did a drawing and took off each individual space and said, okay, this is how many square feet are allocated to this purpose or whatever else. That's our starting point. And then from our discussions in the last meeting, we went up and down depending on what you felt you needed to come up with these programs. And from there, our construction cost estimates are built out on a per space basis. So we're not saying interior is going to be $400 a square foot. We actually break it up, and each restroom has, it's going to have ceramic tile floors, walls, hard ceiling painted, versus mechanical space, which is going to be an open ceiling with a sealed concrete floor. It's a significant cost difference between each of those rooms. So we never go back, and that's one of the strengths of CCS. We don't go and just apply a square foot number for the whole thing. We're really looking at the detail of each of the spaces. Answer your question?
Yeah, good work. I
Tried.
appreciate.
We were scrambling a little bit today getting the downtown stuff, but as you can imagine.
I appreciate the detail, because you started with something so conceptual, and so many different documents, and so much input and feedback from us, so I appreciate what you've done, thank you.
I'm trying to simplify it a little bit here for you. I don't know, just hint it out, and I was gonna take your point there and talk about this, I'm using this just because it was a clean plan that just kind of showed your parking, you can get the layout. One thing I wanted to hit on with the options too, instead of doing this new entrance with permeable parking and everything else, one option you also have potentially is to expand your second story. Your second story ends about here right now. Each bay that you go further towards the west is approximately 1,600 square feet. And that's, from building width to building width. And each one varies a little bit, but it's about that. So if you're saying that you want 4,000 square feet, 4,200 square feet extra, we're talking about 2 to 3 bays of expansion here, which maybe you don't need the permeable parking then at that point. You're still looking at maybe a new entrance, but you have to reallocate space. The reason why we didn't show that is one of the things that was very clear in the last meeting is that you wanted to have as many public-facing services on the first floor as possible to get some of the efficiencies with staffing and things of that nature. So that's why we kind of show this option for now. But where I'm getting at is there's a lot of things we can play with from here once you decide how much money you want to spend and where that money wants to be spent. So the one thing I'm going to hit before I move on into kind of the closing here is the schedule. It's an example schedule. We just want to put something in paper so you can kind of see what the steps are and how we go through it. So I put months as numbers because we don't know when you're going to make a decision. It's your decision to make. When you decide to pursue a building project, the first thing you want to do, is, in our opinion, is sit down, even ahead of having a design team come in, and decide on your scope, your cost, overall schedule, not the nitty-gritty detail, but the overall schedule, how you're going to deliver it, and some of the risk strategies, and we kind of lay that out for you. What you do with that is then you go hire a design team. The design team would then know what they're needing to provide up front, and they're not going to have to do a bunch of risk factors into their fees, and then you can also get apples to apples comparisons on designer fees, which it's fair to them just as much as it's fair to you. You can ask any consultant if you come in there and say, just figure out what you want to do. You want to do a new library building. We've actually seen, not necessarily locally recently, but there's been some library RFPs out there for design consultants that have just said we want to do a 10,000 square foot library building. That's all it says, no budget, nothing else. And it's frustrating as a designer, and that's the coin, because you don't know how to set up your fees. You don't know how to set up, how many meetings do I have to go to? What are the review processes back and forth? So that's why you want to give them as much information up front to make those decisions. So then it could take, and that's going to overlap. You might overlap that a little bit with the design team selection. I'm putting 3 months in there because you're going to interview those. We're going to put out an RFP, before the interview, we're going to put out an RFP that you'd see. RFQ, sorry. And then you go through the interview process, then you have a selection process. It would take a few board meetings, whether it's regular board meetings or special board meetings, but you'd need a plan for some time for that. It's not going to happen overnight.
It's important you get a design team that's going to listen to you and reflect your values and not just give you
In 5 minutes, the library will be closed and the computer shut down. Please be sure to check out our materials before leaving the building.
Absolutely. You get architects that produce cookie-cutter libraries because they've done a number of other libraries before. That's not necessarily what you want. You maybe have got certain factors you think are important or you'd like to highlight. As you talk to the architects, you'll get to listen and see who you can work with, who feels like they understand you, and you'll pick the team that best reflects and going to give you the best product, because it's your library at the end of the day, and you're going to be the ones that are here, so it's important that you select them. And we give you guidance and we give you help, but we do not take part in the selection. That is your voting process.
And then from there, we kind of threw in a number for design phase, trying to say, okay, we're going to go through schematic design, design development, all these different phases you traditionally go through on projects. It might take about 9 months. So the whole, from start to finish, is about a year of just getting to the point where you can start building or putting out something to the street to price for building. Then we have contractor selection, and it overlaps a little bit with the design phase because you're going to go out and solicit bids or proposals or qualifications, depending on what the delivery strategy is and what your schedule is. From there, you're going to go into construction. That could be anywhere from a few months to a year, 2 years, depending on how you want to phase it and what you want to do.
Mark, if we did a downtown location where we may not have the say on some of that information because of the private entity that's working on it, so that conceivably could move the time frame up a little bit. We don't know exactly what, but we would expect a little bit of a compression.
It may move it back because they may decide they want to do the library section last and put all the condos at first. I'm not saying that is the way, but that might be something that they want to start generating, getting revenue in before they start paying to do your life. I mean, I don't know. That's all part and parcel of it, but that's more of a wild card.
This is more of the direct.
This is under your control.
Any questions there? Is that so?
I like it. Is the contingency that is within the construction costs based on your experience with what kind of buffer you want to generally have so that you don't leave your clients disappointed.
Yep, so what it really is there's something called design contingency that you put into construction cost estimates. And the design contingency is, we don't know everything you're going to design today. It's that whole 12 months to figure out. So as you get, so right now we're doing an order of magnitude estimate, just kind of a rough range. And so we're starting out with potentially, the range, accepted range at this point is 10 to 15% of contingency just in the construction cost, outside of your owner's contingency. As you get through this design phase process, you typically do another estimate at the design development phase, so it's a couple months in. That contingency would be coming down because you
There's
start
less
finalizing
unknown.
things. And then so by the time you get down to, somewhere here before your construction, your design contingency might be down to 3 to 5%. And then when you go to bid, it's typically 0%. That goes away. So you caught it. Once exactly what it is, it's the safeguard, so you know you have some safety in there. Moving on. All right. So,
Have we answered the questions? Does it give you, I mean, the idea is it gives you a good guide as to what you get for what dollar amount in a broad scope as an order of magnitude, because there's no design there yet. But
And it's an
from past
estimate,
experience,
it's an estimate,
Yeah.
but we could, it's a starting point.
it's
Yes,
it's exactly,
exactly.
it's a starting point. And you tweak it to what you, so, perfect transition in your business decisions for library. And it's not necessarily today. This is a month from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, whenever that might be. Determine how much you want to spend. You got PMA's information. I'm going to flash back to the funding options right now. You have a mixture, typically. You have general funds, special reserves, alternative revenue bonds. They're all options. And each one of these categories needs to be filled in for how much you want to give towards that for any particular project. That a full renovation, it's a range of $9 to $10 million of this whole space. So do you want to spend that, or do you want to do a half renovation? Or do you want to do a new fit out downtown? That might be $10 million, depending what the developer offers.
The library is now closed. Staff, be sure to turn off your radios. Good night.
For the sporting events, say thank you. So it's going to be some kind of issue. You're not going to spend maybe half of your general fund balance. Maybe you're comfortable spending all your capital reserves. I'm not sure. I can't speak to the board and your appetite for spending. And every village is different. Every district is different. That's really for you to have some thinking about and seeing where you're at. The next bit, start jumping around here, is determine where you want to be. And do we want to continue discussions as we talked about last week or last month's 2 months ago, the meeting? Continue discussion with developers and see where that goes. Now knowing the costs are kind of where they're at. The next thing, when do you want to pursue a project? That's something that, again, we're not asking for those decisions today, but this hopefully gives you some information to churn through that. So I think next steps for CCS's involvement potentially would be, as long as you're okay with it, continuing those discussions with developers, and they'd be discussions at this point, and be clear about that. More from us at this point, other than that. And then also kind of packaging this, unless there's something that you're not seeing or something that really sticks out to you between now and maybe your next board meeting, you can tell Tatiana and she can get back to us. We'd formalize this into kind of a final report with all the cost information and to binders that is kind of, it's a milestone that you met. You did the project definition, here's where we're at as of today, and then once you take the next step, you can kind of refer back to that and make sure it's in record.
it's a freeze frame.
All right. Any other questions or comments from board members? There's testing on the agenda, right?
Hopefully we'll give you a lot to think about.
Oh, yeah, we got a lot, absolutely. There's a lot to digest here.
President Hummel, question for you. So after the freeze frame, I guess, what is our kind of plan to unfreeze the frame
Well,
over the next, is it over the next few months?
well, we'll definitely have a discussion next Wednesday at our board meeting, and we'll have to see how things progress with their conversations with developers. And we'll, I mean, we'll be moving, I mean, going forward here, so, but obviously next Wednesday we'll have to have further discussion, we just got to digest this, and I'm sure we have more questions.
So should we be there on Wednesday?
That's a good question. I do want to,
We're not opposed.
Can we let you,
Open to
yeah,
that.
yeah, if you're,
We're not opposed, but we're available.
probably by the end of the week, we can let you know, maybe survey the board and see where we're at, you know. But it's possible, yeah.
And if you want us here for a part of it. and
Oh, yeah,
to
we'll-
answer any questions
if
that
you
come
come,
up.
we'll put you in front of the agenda, absolutely.
We don't
Yeah,
always
okay.
get that. That's-
So. Any other questions, comments? All right, then motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned at 9:04.